All right, picture this. You're set up on the bank. You made the perfect cast right into that sweet spot. You feel the satisfying thud as your sinker hits the bottom. Your rod is in the holder, tip bent over just right, line tight. Your rig is out there, sitting perfectly on the bottom. Or is it? What if I told you that for half the day, your bottom rig has actually been floating 2, maybe 3 feet off the deck, completely invisible to the carp or catfish you're after? It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's one of the most common mistakes in fishing. In this video, we're going to expose the invisible enemy of every bottom fisherman, the current, and I'll show you how to be 100% sure your bait is exactly where it needs to be. So, here's a question for you right now. Do you think a 2-ounce sinker is enough to hold bottom in a slow-moving river? Drop your answer in the comments before you see what we're about to uncover. For years, most of us have fished on autopilot. We learn to tie a Carolina rig or a sliding sinker rig from our dad or a buddy. We're told, just use a heavy enough weight and you'll be fine. So we do. We cast it out, we see the line go tight, and we assume the job is done. It's a belief system built on faith, not fact. Because let's be honest, we can't see what's happening 50 yards out under 10 feet of murky water. We have to trust our gear, but that trust is often misplaced. The problem is that heavy enough is a vague piece of advice. What's heavy enough for one spot is completely useless in another. What works with one type of line fails miserably with another. We've been focusing on the weight at the end of the line, when the real problem, the real saboteur, is the line itself. Today, we're going to challenge that old grandpa's wisdom and replace it with a little bit of underwater physics that will change your perspective forever. Let's start with the scene we all know and love. It's early morning, the fog is just lifting off the water. You've got your coffee, you've got your gear, and you're feeling confident. You've baited your hook with your secret weapon, and you send that rig flying. It lands with a splash, and you carefully reel up the slack until you feel that connection with your sinker. The rod tip pulls down into a gentle curve. It's the perfect picture of bottom fishing. This image right here is what I call the illusion of control. Everything looks right. Everything feels right. You're in your zone, waiting for that telltale twitch. But what our eyes see on the bank and what is actually happening underwater are two completely different stories. That beautiful, steady bend in your rod tip might not be a sign of a well-anchored rig. In reality, it could be the first clue that you're not fishing on the bottom at all. It's a comfortable feeling, but comfort can be misleading in the world of fishing. So what exactly is this current we're talking about? Most people hear the word and immediately think of a fast-flowing river. And yes, that's the most obvious example. But the truth is, current exists in almost every body of water, and it's often powerful enough to affect your rig even when the surface looks calm. In lakes and large reservoirs, the wind is a massive factor. A steady 10-mile-per-hour wind blowing across a large lake creates a significant underwater current that can move from the surface all the way down to the bottom. Even tidal movements in coastal areas or the simple flow of water into and out of a dam-controlled lake create subtle but persistent water movement. The mistake is thinking that if you can't see the water moving, it's not a factor. You have to assume there is always some form of underwater force at play, ready to mess with your perfect presentation. Thinking of current as a river-only problem is the first step toward failure. Now for a little bit of high school physics, but I promise it's simple and it's critical. How can a little bit of moving water lift a heavy lead sinker? It's all about water pressure and surface area. The current doesn't lift your sinker directly, it can't. Instead, it pushes against the entire length of your fishing line. Imagine your line stretching 150 feet from your rod tip to your rig. That's a huge amount of surface area for the water to grab onto. Your line acts like a giant underwater kite string. The water pushes on the line, creating a large bowing arc or a belly. This belly is what generates the lifting force. The pressure builds and builds along this curve, and that force is transferred right down to your rig. It pulls your sinker not just sideways, but upwards. So even if your sinker is heavy, the constant upward and outward pull from 100 feet of line, acting like a sail, is often more than enough to lift it. It's a slow, subtle process you won't even feel. This brings us to what I call the great sinker myth. We've all been there, digging through our tackle box thinking, well, the 2-ounce isn't holding, so I guess I'll try a 3-ounce. We believe that simply adding more weight is the ultimate solution to fighting current. But that's like trying to fix a leaky pipe by turning up the water pressure. Sometimes it just makes the problem worse. Saying a rig needs to be heavy enough is meaningless without context. Heavy enough for what? For what line diameter? For what casting angle? For what type of bottom composition? A 3-ounce sinker on a thick 30-pound monofilament line might lift off the bottom easier than a 1.5-ounce sinker on a thin 20-pound braided line. The weight is only one small part of a much larger equation. By focusing only on the sinker, we completely ignore the biggest factor in this entire problem, which, as you're starting to see, is the line itself. Let's talk about your number one enemy when fishing in current, your line diameter. It's that simple. The thicker your fishing line, the more surface area it presents to the water. The more surface area, the more grip the current has on it. The more grip it has, the more it creates that big rig-lifting belly. Think about it this way. Trying to hold the bottom with thick monofilament in a current is like trying to hold a giant sail in a hurricane. Now compare that to a thin, modern, braided line. The difference in diameter between a 30-pound mono and a 30-pound braid is massive. The braid might be less than half the thickness. That means the current has less than half the material to push against. This is one of the single biggest advantages of using braid for bottom fishing applications in rivers or surf. You can get away with using significantly less weight to achieve the same result, which in turn improves your bite detection and overall presentation. Your line choice is not just about strength, it's about hydrodynamics. So this naturally leads to the big debate, braided line versus monofilament when fishing in current. Let's break it down. Monofilament has some advantages. It's cheap, it has great abrasion resistance, and its stretch can be forgiving when a big fish makes a sudden run. However, that stretch, combined with its thickness, makes it absolutely terrible for holding bottom in a current. The stretch acts like a giant rubber band, absorbing all the subtle feedback from your sinker. You can't tell if it's dragging, lifting, or settling. Braided line, on the other hand, is a game changer. Its ultra-thin diameter, as we discussed, cuts through the water with far less resistance. Plus, its near-zero stretch gives you a direct connection to your rig. You can feel every single rock, branch, and, most importantly, you can feel the exact moment your sinker starts to lose its grip and lift. The only real downsides to braid are its lower abrasion resistance and the need to use a leader. But for detecting what's truly happening at the end of your line, braid is the undisputed champion in this scenario. Let's spend a moment really understanding the belly in your line. This is the key concept. When you cast out, you imagine your line cutting a straight, direct path from your rod tip to your sinker. This is never the case in moving water. Instead, the current pushes against the middle of your line, forcing it into a deep downstream bow or arc. This arc is the belly, and this belly is a huge bag of problems. First, it's what lifts your rig. The wider and deeper the belly, the more upward force is exerted on your sinker. Second, it completely kills your bite detection. When a fish picks up your bait, it has to pull all the slack out of that giant belly before you'll ever see a twitch on your rod tip. The fish can pick up your bait, move several feet, and drop it without you ever knowing. You're essentially fishing with a giant, invisible bungee cord attached to your hook. Eliminating, or at the very least minimizing that line belly, is the primary goal of any good bottom fishing strategy in current. Here's a real-world example to help you visualize this. Go down to a local creek or stream. Take a simple house brick and tie a long, thick rope To it. Now stand on the bank and toss that brick into the middle of the stream. At first, the brick will stay put, but watch the rope. You'll see the current immediately start to push the middle of the rope downstream, forming that familiar belly. As the belly gets bigger and the pressure increases, you'll see the rope get tighter and tighter. Then you'll see the brick start to wobble. Then it will start to drag. And if the current is strong enough, you'll eventually see the brick lift right off the bottom and start tumbling downstream, suspended by the force acting on the rope. Your fishing rig is doing the exact same thing on a smaller scale. Your heavy sinker is the brick, and your thick line is the rope. It's a simple demonstration of a powerful force that we constantly ignore. Is tight, ready to signal a bite, but is tight, ready to signal a bite. But your rod tip is a notorious liar. That steady bend is often not a sign that your sinker is holding firm. It's actually a sign that the current is putting a significant amount of pressure on the belly of your line. The current is stretching your line, and that stretch is what's bending your rod. Your sinker could be skipping along the bottom or even floating 5 feet above it, and your rod tip would look exactly the same. You're not feeling the bottom, you're feeling the power of the river. A truly well-anchored rig in a moderate current will often allow for a slightly softer bend in the rod as the line cuts through the water more efficiently with less of a bow. We've all felt this sensation. You cast out, your rig settles, and then you feel this little tap, tap, drag through your line. The common assumption is, oh, that's just my sinker rolling along the rocks on the bottom, it's settling into a good spot. And sometimes that's true, but far more often what you're actually feeling is the current performing its magic trick. That tap is your sinker being lifted off the bottom. The drag is it moving downstream a few feet while suspended, and the next tap is it crashing back down onto the bottom, only to have the process repeat itself over and over. Your bait isn't sitting in one spot waiting for a fish. It's hopping and skipping its way downstream, out of the strike zone you so carefully cast to. This is not fishing effectively, this is just hoping a fish accidentally swims into your bait as it bounces by. Recognizing this feeling for what it is, a sign of failure, not success, is a huge step forward. Here is a simple, effective trick you can use right now on the bank. I call it the line angle test. It helps you visualize whether you're holding bottom or not. When you first cast out and your sinker hits the bottom, take note of the angle where your line enters the water. Let's say it's at a 45-degree angle from your rod tip. Now wait 5 minutes, go back and look at that angle again. Has it become steeper? Is your line now entering the water almost directly below your rod tip? Or has it become shallower with your line entering the water further downstream? If the angle has become significantly shallower and your line is pointing further downstream, that's a dead giveaway. The current has created a massive belly in your line and has likely dragged your rig a good distance from where it landed. A rig that is truly holding bottom will maintain a relatively consistent line angle over time. It's a simple observation that tells a very important story. Another visual cue that many anglers miss is right on the surface of the water. Look closely at where your line enters the water. If your line is cutting cleanly through a calm surface, that's generally a good sign. It means there's less side pressure on your line. However, if you see a distinct V-shaped wake forming on the surface where your line goes in, that's a trouble indicator. That little wake is created by your line being pulled sideways with significant force by the current. It's physical proof of the drag that is working to create a belly underwater. The bigger and more pronounced that V-wake is, the more pressure is on your line, and the more likely it is that your rig is not staying put. This is especially useful on days where there's a light chop on the water. That little V-wake will be a constant, telling you that even if you can't feel it, the current is hard at work trying to lift your presentation. Let's get into the solutions, and we'll start with your terminal tackle. Sinkers are not created equal. The shape of your sinker can matter even more than its weight. The classic round or bank sinker is probably the worst choice for fishing in current. Its round shape is designed to roll and move easily, which is exactly what you don't want. A pyramid sinker is much better. Its flat sides and sharp point are designed to dig into sand or mud and hold firm. For river fishing on hard or rocky bottoms, a flat no-roll or coin sinker is the absolute king. Its low profile and wide surface area sits flat on the bottom, allowing water to flow over it rather than under it. This design uses the water pressure to its advantage, pinning it down instead of lifting it up. Switching from a 3-ounce bank sinker to a 3-ounce no-roll sinker can be the difference between holding bottom and fishing in mid-water. Stop thinking about weight and start thinking about shape and design. Okay, so when is it appropriate to just up the weight? Sometimes it is the only answer, but it should be your last resort, not your first. And you should do it strategically. The goal is not to use the heaviest sinker you can cast. The goal is to use the absolute lightest sinker you can get away with that will hold the bottom. Why? Because a lighter sinker provides much better bite detection. A lighter sinker is also less likely to get snagged. So when you feel your rig starting to lift or drag, go up in weight by the smallest increment possible. Go from a 2-ounce to a 2.5-ounce, not straight to a 4-ounce. Cast it out and perform the tests we've talked about. Does it hold now? If so, you're good. If not, go up another 1/2 ounce. It's a process of tuning your rig to the specific conditions of the day. Blindly clipping on a massive chunk of lead is a lazy approach that hurts your fishing more than it helps. We touched on the line itself, but let's dig into the property of stretch. The low stretch advantage of braid or even fluorocarbon line is a massive benefit for bottom fishing. Think about it. With high stretch monofilament, when the current starts to lift your rig, the line just stretches a little bit more. It absorbs that feeling, masking the truth of what's happening. You get no feedback. With a no stretch braided line, the moment that sinker begins to lift or even just wobble, that sensation is transmitted directly up the line, through the rod, and into your hands. You can feel the bottom. You can feel the individual rocks. You can feel the difference between sand and mud. This direct feedback loop allows you to know with 100% certainty whether you are connected to the bottom or if you're just dragging through the water. It's like the difference between talking on a crystal clear phone line versus one with a ton of static. Here's a simple adjustment that costs nothing but can make a huge difference: your rod position. Many anglers place their rods in a holder pointing high up into the air. This looks classic, and it's great for seeing bites, but it's terrible for fishing in current or wind. Why? Because the higher you point your rod, the more line you have out of the water, exposed to the elements. The wind will catch this line and create a huge, unwanted belly before it even touches the water. The best practice when dealing with current is to position your rods as low to the water as possible. Point the rod tips directly down your line toward the water's surface. This minimizes the amount of line that the wind can affect, and it creates a more direct, efficient angle for cutting through the current. It may not look as cool, but it's far more effective at keeping your line tight and your rig on the bottom where it belongs. Now let's talk about technique, and it starts with the cast itself. Where you cast is just as important as what you cast. The common practice is to cast directly out in front of you at a 90-degree angle to the bank and the current. This is actually the worst possible angle. It maximizes the amount of line that is directly exposed to the broadside force of the current, which in turn creates the biggest possible line belly. A much smarter approach is to cast downstream at roughly a 45-degree angle. By casting with the current, you dramatically reduce the amount of side pressure on your line. The water is flowing more parallel to your line rather than directly against it. This simple change in your casting angle will allow you to hold the bottom with a significantly lighter weight, improving your entire setup. It's a small change in habit that yields massive results. Here's an advanced technique borrowed from the world of fly fishing that every bottom fisherman should learn: mending your line. A mend is simply a strategic repositioning of the line on the water's surface to counteract the effect of the current. After you cast, as your sinker is falling, you'll see the current immediately start to form that downstream belly. To counteract this, you can make a quick upstream flick or roll of your rod tip. This will throw a loop of slack line upstream. The current then has to push through this slack before it can start creating the belly again. This gives your sinker more time to hit the bottom and get a solid grip before the line pressure starts to build. You can even do this after your rig is on the bottom. If you see a big belly forming, you can lift your rod high and mend the line back upstream to reduce the pressure. It's an active way of managing your line rather than just passively letting the river have its way with it. Another crucial technique is to feel it down. This is the opposite of the cast and forget method. So many anglers cast out, and as soon as the sinker hits the water, they flip the bail on their spinning reel and put the rod in the holder. This is a huge mistake. When you do this, the sinker falls on a completely slack line. The current can carry it far downstream from your target, and you have no idea where it actually landed or if it even hit the bottom cleanly. Instead, after you cast, keep your bail open and gently feather the line with your index finger. Maintain a semi-tight line as the sinker falls. This way, you can feel the exact moment it makes contact with the bottom. You'll feel a distinct tick or thump. As soon as you feel that, you close the bail. Now you have a known starting point, and you can be confident that you're on the bottom, at least for now. Finally, here is the ultimate test. It's a simple, surefire way to know if your rig is truly holding or if it's being lifted by the current. Once you've cast out and you think you're settled on the bottom with your rod in the holder and the line tight, do this one thing. Very slowly and very carefully, reel your handle just 1/4 of a turn to create a tiny bit of slack. Or you can just gently pull a few inches of line off the spool with your hand. Now watch what happens. If that slack stays in the line and the line sags for a few seconds before the current slowly tightens it again, congratulations, you are holding the bottom. But if the moment you give it that slack, the line immediately snaps tight again, like a guitar string, that's your proof. You are not holding the bottom. The current is lifting your rig, and the only thing keeping your rod bent is the water pressure on your line. This simple test exposes the truth and will tell you immediately if you need to make an adjustment. So, let's wrap this up. The big takeaway today is this: the current is constantly, silently working against you. That steady bend in your rod and that heavy connected feeling is not proof your rig is on the bottom. In many cases, it's actually proof that it's being lifted by the force of the water against your line. The most unexpected, game-changing realization for most people is that your line, not your sinker, is often the biggest part of the problem. Your line's diameter and the angle of your cast are the secret weapons. By managing those two things, you can use a much lighter weight, which gives you better contact with the bottom and massively improves your bite detection. This isn't just about getting a few more bites. It's about fundamentally changing your approach from one of hope to one of control. Thank you so much for watching. If this video opened your eyes and challenged some old beliefs, do me a favor and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more tips that go against the grain. Now, for my final question to you, after watching this, what is the one single thing you are going to change about your bottom fishing setup on your next trip? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear what you've learned